Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you!
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
When Graham put together the along with ITN Productions, the production company that made Ancient Apocalypse, when they went to start arranging to film for that series, they had to go around the world and get permission from, all these governments of all these places that they wanted to visit. They went to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. They'd get permission from the Turkish government to film there. They went to Indonesia and filmed there. They went to Mexico and filmed in the, Mayan sites and Malta, wherever they went around the world, they had to get permission from all these governments, and they got that. The only place in the entire world that refused to give them permission was the Ohio History Connection Corporation that owns Serpent Mound. And, so Graham called me up. He knew that I lived next door, and so we arranged to film on the property next door, and I did that interview with him. I supplied some of the drone photography that was used for the episode.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
All things continually lead back to serpents, dragons, fairies, Nephilim, and fallen angels.
In the distance looms a mystical mountain.
As Mike Heiser used to say, if it's in the Bible and it's weird, it's probably important.
At its peak, a great fire burns, concealing the Prometheus Lens.
This development of this knowledge that's being talked about within the mystery schools.
An ancient artifact said to reveal the hidden truth within a deliberately darkened world.
There's a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
The Smithsonian, they caught wind of a giant skeleton. They would send their agents out to get it.
But it takes courage to move forward, to move out of the shadows, out of the unreality that we think of as reality.
We are all on the hero's journey.
Mankind has been in contact with and influenced by extraterrestrials.
Leave the Serpent Mound of bull feathers out of it.
Look at it from a different perspective.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we are about to fill it up. Welcome to the Prometheus Lens Podcast, the place where the conversations are always enlightening. I'm your host, Justin, and here we like to use the allegory of the Prometheus Lens to take a second look at everything. Hey, if you guys are new to the channel, welcome to the hero's journey. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Down below we'll have our socials. Be sure to check us out on our various platforms. That would be much appreciated. Well, guys, you know that recently I went on a little field trip to Ohio for a conference and went to Serpent Mound and shared some pictures and told you guys I got some footage and working on putting a little film together for you guys. And through a mutual friend, Mikey Lesnar, that was recently on the show, I discovered this next guest. And once again, hindsight is always 20/20. I wish I would have knew about this gentleman, met this gentleman before I went to Serpent Mound, because he could have really educated me. But I'd like to welcome to the show Jeff Wilson, and Jeff is affiliated with Friends of Serpent Mound. Jeff, thank you for coming on and talking to us today.
Thanks for the invitation. Always happy to talk about Serpent Mound.
And Serpent Mound is not your only expertise. You've done lots of research and looked into these earthworks and written some books, and you're a wealth of knowledge on this subject, so thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. My recent book here, I can show you a copy of. This is Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, the expanded edition. It's actually 2 volumes. It's like reading the phone book. It's enormous book that I put together a couple years ago. Actually started out working on a book about Serpent Mound, and I don't know if you're too familiar with that the archaeological literature about mounds and earthworks or anything like that, but there was a very famous book that was published about the mounds and the earthworks back in 1848, written by 2 guys from Ohio, Ephraim George Squire and Edwin Hamilton Davis. And they lived in the town of Chillicothe, which is surrounded by a lot of prehistoric mounds and earthworks. And they wrote a book partly based on their own explorations, but also about a lot of other people's explorations throughout the eastern half of the United States. And that book was the very first book published by the Smithsonian, and Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. So that book had the very first account written about Serpent Mound, and that had included the very first published illustration of Serpent Mound. And as part of the research that I was doing for my forthcoming book on Serpent Mound, I went back to their original account and went through it kind of with a fine-tooth comb, found out that they had some factual errors in there and, minor stuff. But one of the things I realized in that book, reading and looking at that, was that the illustration of Serpent Mound in that book, which, that book was published in 1848, 175 some years ago. Almost entirely, all of the archaeological literature, all the historical literature that ever references that book, they always credit Squire and Davis, the co-authors, for the illustrations in the book. But they actually didn't do any of them. The illustration of Serpent Mound that was in that book was from a pair of lithographers. The Smithsonian, in publishing the book, hired a couple of different art teams to produce illustrations for the book. And the one of Serpent Mound, which was a lithograph, if you're unfamiliar with lithography, essentially it's a way in which, for printing purposes, the artist will take a drawing of whatever the subject is, and then they will inscribe that drawing onto a wax-coated slab of stone. I'll use a little stylus, and they'll scrape off the wax, and then they apply a weak acid to that, which it doesn't eat away the wax, but it eats into the stone. Then they wash that off, they take off the wax, and they apply the ink, and they stamp that on the paper. The key to it, though, is the artist has to draw or redraw that drawing in mirror reverse on that slab of stone. And so then they apply the ink, they stamp the paper, and that's how the printing technology was back then. There was no Xeroxing or, anything like that. So no photography at that point. So they, this drawing or illustration of Serpent Mound was a lithograph, which meant that the lithographic artists, in this case, 2 guys, Cerrone and Major, were the company hired to do the lithographs. They created this from an original drawing. And oftentimes, those original drawings have details or that have changed between the original drawing and the final printed product, and which, in the case of archaeology, can be substantially different in the real world. Like if they put a mound on the map, in the wrong place that could be hundreds of yards away from where it is, or how whatever the detailed changes that happen could be. And so I became determined to see if I could actually find the original drawing that was used by Saronian Major to create that lithograph. I know that the chances of that were pretty slim. Illustration that I found of Serpent Mound had never previously been published before. It had never even been cited before. Nobody even knew that it existed, essentially. But I hunted when I found that illustration, not only did I find the one for Serpent Mound, but I found about 95% of all the other illustrations for the book. And there are substantial changes that were done between the original material and what actually got published by the Smithsonian's artists. And so I decided to republish the original book for the 175th anniversary of the book, but also to publish all of that original material, basically inserted as supplemental pages throughout the original book. So the original book was like 350 pages. I ended up adding about 1,000 additional pages. It ended up being a 3-volume hardcover edition, 2-volume paperback, which I showed you there. It was a massive undertaking, and I would say 99% of all of the new illustrations in the book just had never been published before, never been cited before by archaeologists or historians or anything. I found this material in archives across the country. About 14 different major institutions held these papers of different people, and I tracked all that stuff down and we published it. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was a huge undertaking, and now I'm working on a multi-volume book about Serpent Mound, and so that's my. I'm also a publisher, and I've published books by other authors in the past. I'm working on editing a book right now about the Portsmouth, Ohio earthworks with author Emily Aldrich. We're probably about 2/3 of the way through that, I would think, and so that hopefully will be out, either by the end of this year or early next year, and got others on the way. So I spent a lot of time really trying to track down what the actual stories are, not what I call archaeopropaganda. There's a lot of misinformation in the archaeological community that's just not factually true whatsoever, and they just make it up and they just spew this stuff out as if it's actually true, and but it's stuff that's handed down from teacher to student. They don't know any better. They were taught that this was true, whatever. So I think that when I first started volunteering at Serpent Mound, over 20 years ago, I kept running into this issue of, but those details, what is the reality of that question? Whatever the question is about Serpent Mound. And I just was unsatisfied with the standard, story that barely would scratch the surface of answering whatever your question, was that you had. And I just became determined to track down the reality of everything I could find out about the site. And, so I've ended up becoming, kind of the default Serpent Mound historian of our time, I guess, because very few people have ever even tried to undertake a project like that, just to try to find out any of the original information about any of that stuff.
Well, with those original drawings, was there any significant changes or differences that you noticed that's significant, that has it caught your attention? Or
Oh yeah, yeah. I could show you hundreds of examples. Do you see that there are two map illustrations of earthworks on this screen now?
yeah.
Okay. So the one on the left, the kind of yellow toned one, that is a published map that was in ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley of the High Bank earthworks in outside of Chillicothe, which is now part of the Hopewell Culture National Historic Park, run by the National Park Service. It was recently named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is not open to the public, although other earthworks that are part of that park are open to the public. This is one that's not. But on what you're seeing are what appear to be two fairly similar drawings. But when you really start looking at the details of this, you'll start to see that there are substantial differences. You have that giant circle connected to kind of an octagon in the upper center. And then in the lower center, there are these two sort of parallel pathways that connect a bunch of other circular enclosure earthworks. I'll just draw your attention to one detail here. So if you're going down through the center of this on the left, you'll come to a point where it shows there are three little mounds across that sort of are spaced across the distance between those two parallel lines. But on the drawing on the right, it shows that there are four mounds there, and the spacing is a little bit wider apart. Now, on the scale of this earthwork, you're talking about something that it would be hundreds of feet in the wrong place if you were an archaeologist and you're going out there looking at something. And this is just one, sort of example. There are many, many examples of that. Dozens and dozens of examples like that. More changes or less changes, but they all add up to a lot of erroneous information that archaeologists have published over the past, 150 years or so. I call out in the book several examples of this, comparing what modern archaeologists have essentially just concocted out of whole cloth, made up to fill a gap in information where they all could have easily solved the issue by just going back and looking at these original primary source documents. These documents have been preserved in archives around the country, but most people never go back and look at any of this stuff. Nearly everything that I have in my book could never have been written by ChatGPT or any of those AI things, because almost everything that was in my book had never been digitized before. I went to these archives and these institutions and looked through these papers and got them to digitize this stuff to be able to produce this book. And so, this is new knowledge, new information that, has now finally surfaced after, 175 years.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, you've worked, at this site for many years, you said, and you worked with Graham Hancock and actually helped him get in there at Serpent Mound, and you was in that documentary that's so famous now on Netflix.
Ancient Apocalypse, yeah. Well, I knew Graham for a couple of years. He was kind enough to be a volunteer speaker for our summer solstice event that the Friends of Serpent Mound holds every year. He came and gave an interview with another Serpent Mound luminary researcher, a friend of mine by the name of Ross Hamilton. They sort of did a joint question and interview session for our event. And Graham had come out to visit Serpent Mound because he was interested in getting photographs of the summer solstice sunset alignment at Serpent Mound. Serpent Mound, for those that don't know, is a big earthwork. They call it an effigy, meaning it's in the shape of something recognizable, in this case of a snake. And it bends back and forth across the landscape such that its bends and the directions that it points to the rising and setting of the sun on the solstices and the equinoxes. There's also a bunch of lunar alignments in there. I could probably show you a picture of some of those alignments here.
And you've documented that well, because you got lots of pictures and videos of all these alignments and stuff. It's amazing work you've done.
Well, it wasn't all me. Let me go back here and see if I can share this. So what I'm showing here is this is a LiDAR map that I made of Serpent Mound back in 2007. This technology was new at the time. The Ohio Department of Transportation was flying over all the state highways, mapping the state highways. And I knew that one of the state highways ran near Serpent Mound, and I guessed that they might be able to have captured the Serpent Mound with their flight data. And they did, and I got a hold of that data, and I created this map, which then I removed all of the trees. So all you're seeing, took out all the trees, all the buildings, and all you're seeing is the landscape itself. So this is about as accurate a map as you can get. It's, if you look at the very bottom of the screen there, it's comprised of about 223,000 data points to create a three-dimensional map. Brush Creek is the water shed there that runs sort of parallel with Serpent Mound. There's a little creek along the north of that called North Creek. But Serpent Mound there, is an earthwork construction. And those bends, they point to the sunsets and the sunrises of all of these various key dates throughout the year of, the sun's movement around the sky. So summer solstice sunrise, summer solstice sunset, equinox sunrise, equinox sunset, winter solstice sunrise, winter solstice sunset. And these were all things that were discovered only since the 1980s. The first two people that discovered one of these alignments, Clark and Marjorie Hardiman, they discovered the summer solstice sunset alignment, which is what Graham Hancock came to photograph. He and his wife Santha. Santha actually did the photography. I helped her to fly her drone and get her in the correct position to be able to take the iconic photograph that they used both in Ancient Apocalypse, but also in Graham's book, America Before. And a number of these LiDAR images that I had done back in 2007, Graham used in his book, America Before.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris Vick. I'm the founder of Squatch Survival Gear, and today I'm here to talk to you about some of our most popular packs. In 2017, I founded Squatch Survival Gear because I was tired of seeing low-quality, mass-produced packs flooding the American market. I decided I'd make a pack that was 100% designed and manufactured in the United States, and today I'm here to talk to you about some of our most popular packs. This is the Night Howler. It was designed for EDC and travelers. As you can see, it's small. It's roughly 10 by 12 inches. It's designed for everyday carry. The pass-through pad allows you to put it on your luggage when you travel. This is the Rougarou. Very civilianized, lots of attachment points. This is a 25-liter pack. We designed it for a little lighter load. If you need more than the Night Howler, you should try this. This is the Mothman, very similar to the Rougarou, roughly the same size, but it's designed for carrying a much heavier load. The removable waist belt will help you carry that extra load. You've also got your retaining strap if you're going to take that on a travel trip. This is the Kakamora. This would be your first 72-hour pack, as we used to say in the Army. It comes with an internal frame, totally adjustable straps, heavily padded. You can carry heavy loads, carry lots of gear. This is the Rock Ape. It's a 45-liter pack. Same internal frame, same great padded straps that you like, with a few extra features. If you're wondering what's with all the crazy names, Well, that's because finding 100% American made is as hard as finding Bigfoot in the woods. When you're ready to carry our packs, contact us at squatchsurvivalgear.com or any of our social medias.
Hey guys, what's going on? Hey, I just got a call to action for you. If you're enjoying this episode at all, you're getting anything from it, please take the time to click that like button, click that share button, and share us with your friends and your family on social media. Those are great things that help us to grow the show and increase our listenership. And also, while you're here and I have your attention, flip over from the chat, go to the comment section. Just drop me a quick comment. Let me know where you're from, what you think of the episode. All these things help the algorithm and help the show. And if you're not on YouTube and you're listening on your favorite platform, please, if you've not done so already, give us a 5-star review. All of these things are great ways that you can contribute to the show that you love and listen to every single week. Thank you guys for all the love and support. Back to the episode.
And so Clark and Marjorie Hardiman discovered that alignment. The archaeologists just despised that, primarily because Clark and Marjorie Hardiman were not archaeologists. Clark Hardiman had done some work on a site down in Florida at the mouth of Crystal River. It's known as the Crystal River Mound site. He found a number of astronomical alignments there back in the 70s. And then he turned his, gaze to Serpent Mound, and he and Marjorie found this alignment for the summer-solstice to sunset. And the key thing is that, again, they're not archaeologists. They weren't scientists, but they were dowsers. I don't know if you know what a dowser is, the thing when you walk around with the rods and
search for water.
Search for water, right? That was what they, were sort of known for. And so that often has been, kind of lumped in with pseudoscience. And so here are two pseudoscientists, so to speak, were the ones responsible for finding one of the most important features of Serpent Mound ever uncovered. And it wasn't until a number of years after their discovery that additional researchers found additional solar alignments within the bends of the body of the serpent. And another researcher who was an archaeoastronomer, a professional archaeoastronomer, Dr. William Romaine, he also uncovered that there are all kinds of lunar alignments at the site, which that cycle of lunar alignments is an 18.6 year cycle. The solar alignments happen every year. They're an annual cycle. So my contribution to this was to confirm the summer solstice sunset alignment. I did that back in, I think, 2004. And then I found the winter solstice sunset alignment that goes through the spiral tail in 2015. And so I've spent quite a bit of time documenting each one of these alignments, photography, aerial photography and ground photography. People can go out onto the internet and see time-lapse video that I've done of several of these, so you can watch the sunset come up in some of the bends of the serpent. Interestingly enough, as I've been documenting this, and others have been documenting this for good 30 years plus now, one of the archaeologists that works for the corporation that owns Serpent Mound, he wrote an article a couple of years ago that said that there are no astronomical alignments at Serpent Mound whatsoever. So you have a professional archaeologist from the corporation that owns the place that says, no, it doesn't exist. But, don't believe what you can see. Don't believe what you can actually stand out there and watch. Don't believe any of the documentation. We're just going to deny that it exists. And part of it is sort of this weird knee-jerk reaction to people like Graham Hancock, again, a non-archaeologist going out to the public and talking about these ancient places. When Graham put together along with ITN Productions, the production company that made Ancient Apocalypse, when they went to start arranging to film for that series, they had to go around the world and get permission from, all these governments of all these places that they wanted to visit. They went to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. They'd get permission from the Turkish government to film there. They went to Indonesia and filmed there. They went to Mexico and filmed in, Mayan sites, and Malta, wherever they went around the world, they had to get permission from all these governments, and they got that. The only place in the entire world that refused to give them permission was the Ohio History Connection Corporation that owns Serpent Mound. And, so Graham called me up. He knew that I lived next door, and so we arranged to film on the property next door, and I did that interview with him. I supplied some of the drone photography that was used for the episode, along with Drone Ohio. They're another drone kind of professional company. We both had drone photography that was supplied for that episode. And, I did not know that Graham was going to go down to the entrance and stand by the sign and read the email. I didn't know that until, that episode actually aired. But I knew that they refused to allow him to film. That was the reason why he contacted me to help participate. And he's not the first to have that happen to him. They have denied a lot of companies that wanted to film at Serpent Mound. They denied NPR. They denied local Fox, NBC, ABC affiliates that, from Cincinnati that wanted to come out and do stories. There was a production company, Native American production company from Canada. They did a show called Red Earth Rising, in which the writers, the hosts, the camera people, the sound people, the producers, everybody involved in the production are Native Americans, and they got denied to be able to film at Serpent Mound. They wanted to do an episode about Serpent Mound, and I did the same thing for them as I did for Graham. Hosted them, on our adjacent property, and provided drone photography for their episode about Serpent Mound. I'm very much against that kind of censorship. It's flat out censorship. They're trying to really tightly control the narrative of what people want to, what they want people to know about Serpent Mound, what they want people to understand about the site. And, what I can say is that most people, even people who have some knowledge and expertise about Serpent Mound, we don't really know as much as we think we know, from
educated guesses, if we're being honest.
Yeah. I went and looked at all of the artifacts that were excavated from Serpent Mound back in the 1880s that are at Harvard University. I went through and looked at every single artifact and figured out what mounds that they were excavated from and where they were found in the park. And until I had done that work, nobody knew any of that stuff. It was all just, we think this is what's going on, but they really didn't know. And I would say coming away from that experience of figuring out that whole, archaeological expedition that lasted for 3 years, that we know very, very little about Serpent Mound. One of the things I found as I was going through that material was I came across 2 previously unpublished maps of Serpent Mound that on one of them showed everything that they had found after their 3 years of working there. And one of the things that they found they never even published about, which was they found what appears to be like a 300-foot diameter wooden post circle, or what some archaeologists would call a wood henge, for figuring out, the risings and settings of astronomical objects. And, until I figured that out, found that on one of these maps, nobody had any idea that there was such a thing that existed there. There was a lot of work that Harvard did in and around Serpent Mound that's never been published. The guy who was in charge of that project wrote a 10-page popular magazine article about Serpent Mound, and that includes all the illustrations and photographs that were included in that. And that's the sum total that they ever published about what they found. And, that appears to be the narrative of what, the corporation that owns the place likes to talk about. They don't really understand what has been there for the 125 years that they've owned the site. They have done literally like 2 minor archaeological excavations there in 125 years. I mean, the level of knowledge is very thin, and we don't really understand much about it.
And what got me was when I went, I come with my cameras and stuff, and I'm just an amateur guy with a small YouTube channel, and I was going around and filming some stuff, and then the sky tower was down, so I couldn't get a good view of it.
It's been down for several years.
Yeah, and then I seen all these signs everywhere: no drones, no drones, no drones. And I brought my drone, and I was so disappointed. And I've always been a kind of a rebel anyway, so I was like, I'll just, I went on a Sunday, so it was bare bones crew there, and I got all my filming done that I wanted to get, and I was like, I'm just going to launch this sucker, and if they kick me out, they kick me out. And I launched it up there next to that little patio where the head is. Mm-hmm. And I got up and I made it all the way to where it starts to bend. And of course I was looking down, and all of a sudden I just hear, sir, and somebody runs up, and I was like, shit.
Did you get bullhorn? They like to scream at you with a bullhorn.
Well, see, luckily, I think where it was a Sunday, they were kind of chill, and the guy was in civilian clothing too, so he didn't, he blended in. And so I landed the drone, and he was like, yeah, you can't, fly drones. We got signs everywhere. And I was like, oh, I didn't pay no attention. I'm sorry. And I was like, well, how come you can't record here? I said, your sky tower's down. I said, and you can't fly a drone. I said, you can't appreciate and see this thing. I said, unless you're in the air. And he says, because he said, this is a sacred site. It's a burial place. People come here for rituals. And I told him, I said, well, I see all kinds of footage online. How do people get that? And he says, oh, you fill out some paperwork and you get proper permission. And so I said, so a piece of paper makes it unsacred for a short amount of time?
Yeah, that's funny.
And then he's like, well, I might have to ask you to leave, sir. And I was like, well, all right.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to follow the rules that they had posted there. However, I will say that they can prevent people from launching their drone in the park or landing their drone in the park, but the FAA controls the airspace, and as long as you are following the FAA's regulations, if you launched from outside of the park, you can fly over Serpent Mound all you want to. They have no control over it. The FAA has the control over the airspace, which is what allowed, Drone Ohio to fly over and get their footage. I've flown over it many times. I think I have something on the order of 72,000 aerial photographs of Serpent Mound, that I've taken. I generally don't fly over the park during park hours, mostly because I'm there to take pictures of sunrise and sunset where I can get the astronomical alignments shots. And the park is never open during those periods of time, or very rarely. And so I don't, I always, essentially I'm flying on my own property because I own property next door. and I don't really need their permission to fly over my own property anyway. So, but I encourage people to follow, the rules that they have. I would be shocked if if you submitted a piece of paper and asked for permission, because I have yet to hear from someone that has done that and has actually gotten permission, unless it's from one of their own affiliated companies or organizations that they have pre-approved.
I'm sure a big donation helps.
It goes to a committee for review of people that are not even in Ohio for the most part. They're out in Oklahoma, and those people generally take months and months and months for a review, and generally they come back and say no. It's always no. So I've yet to hear from a media corporation that has been successful. I've had many contact me. I say, this is what you need to do. You need to contact, the corporation that owns the site, and you have to work through them and get your permits. And it's always no. So.
Yeah. Well, Graham, he thinks that this place, is as a result of an ancient lost civilization, that this thing could be 10, 12,000 years old. What's your opinion on it?
I disagree with Graham's interpretation of that for a couple of reasons. He bases that on where he draws the alignment line for the summer solstice sunset. So you can, I don't know if that picture is still on the screen there that you're seeing. Yeah. But there is that summer solstice sunset through the oval there. It starts at the back of the notch of the triangular head of the serpent, and then goes through what would have been where there was a central stone altar in that oval. That altar existed in the oval up until the mid-1980s. And then the corporation that owns the site got tired of cutting the grass around it, so they removed all the stones and threw them over both sides of the cliff on either side, so that it made it easier for them to cut the grass.
Wow.
And so it's hard to tell today where that alignment used to go, but that's where it went. And then from there on straight to the horizon. What Graham has done is he has slightly shifted that line a little towards the southwest to make it go through. There's a little triangular mound in front of the oval towards the cliff there, and he puts it through the middle of that. My disagreement with that is just a remnant mound of a larger outer oval that existed at Serpent Mound. It used to be an oval within an oval. And that little tip mound, so to speak, is just the last remaining part of that larger mound. And it shouldn't be used as a directional marker. And it's offline from the central axis through the oval. But nevertheless, that's his methodology. Everybody's got their own, opinion and methodology. But based on that, he calculated that the last time that alignment could have occurred would have been about 10 to 12,000 years ago. The real challenge with that is that we know that Serpent Mound was constructed around 321 BC. A friend of mine, archaeologist William Romaine, led a project in 2011 and 2012, and there was a whole series of different applications of archaeological methods that were used in that project. And one of them, led by two archaeologists from the University of Indiana, they were given a permit to drill a whole series of cores through the body of the serpent. And then they pulled out these cylinders out of the body of the serpent, laid them out, looked at all the various layers of how the serpent was constructed. And they were able to find in 7 of the 17 that they collected, 7 of the cores showed bits of carbon at the very base layer of where the mound had been constructed. And they sent all that off for carbon dating. The Friends of Serpent Mound actually paid for half of that carbon dating to work to occur. And that carbon dating came back with a median age of 321 BC, not 10 to 12,000 years ago, as Graham suggested. And so I follow the evidence that we have rather than Graham's conjecture about it. That's not to say that he's not doing great work or interesting work, or that his observation of that, brings up considerations that we should think about. But I just try to follow the evidence that we have at hand. And we know that Serpent Mound wasn't constructed that long ago, not 12,000 years ago. The other piece about that, which, you might argue could have been, is that the builders of Serpent Mound, the designers of Serpent Mound, could have designed it in such a fashion to make it appear to reference an earlier date. That's not uncommon for other prehistoric civilizations in North America. The Mayans, for instance, often, put up little stone stela or monuments, carved monuments in front of many of the buildings that they built. And almost every single one of those, they always reference what is known as the Mayan creation date, or the beginning of the Mayan calendar, the cycle of time that ended in 2012, that 4,000 something odd year period of time. And so, they always referenced earlier dates in their construction, because they would start their, date, and then they would move forward to the present time. And, they would kind of have a timeline on their monument, to reference those earlier events. That could be something, going on here like that it's referencing an earlier event, but I doubt very much that it's referencing a date that far back. Maybe it's, there's an argument that could be made that it could be referencing the earlier Mayan creation date. There might be some evidence for that, but, I think Graham kind of overextended, where he was thinking that this was.
And it lined up too with his idea of Egypt, with the Sphinx facing the summer solstice sunrise in that same time frame. So that's probably why he was trying to make that correlation with that. That's
an idea that Graham did not originate. That came from John Anthony West, and John Anthony West got the geologist Robert Schoch to look at the dating of the Sphinx geologically, and they came up with that earlier date. And I know that Graham was friends with John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, so I'm not surprised that he reported on it. I think as far back as probably his Fingerprints of the Gods book, back in the 90s. He probably talked about it then, but both that was a kind of an observation that John Anthony West had figured out, before that.
Well, what about that coil that's gone? Because when I was there, they actually have signs now that talk about the astronomical alignments, but they say, some believe this is, an astronomical alignment, but they showed this extra coil that was up close to the head that surveys have shown that used to be there.
That was one of the really revolutionary findings that came out of that 2011-2012 Serpent Mound project led by Dr. William Romaine. One of the aspects of that project was they got an archaeologist to run a magnetometer over the site, Dr. Jared Burks from Ohio Valley Archaeology, and they collected this magnetometer data, and the magnetometer data revealed that at one time in prehistory, more than likely, there had been another bend in the serpent right behind the head of the serpent, that triangular piece. And I think they have that on one of the signs. They show the magnetometer survey data. That I volunteered on that project, and that was confirmed not just through looking at that magnetometer data, but they actually dug a trench across where that earthwork had been. And in digging down, they found the foundation footings of that bend in the earthwork. Unfortunately, they didn't find anything that they could use to carbon date it. So we don't know when that bend of the serpent was constructed. And we don't know when it was removed. It does not appear on any of the earliest drawings of Serpent Mound, which date back to Squire and Davis, which I mentioned at the beginning, that from Ancient Monuments in the Mississippi Valley. It's not in that book. There were probably a dozen drawings made before 1890 of Serpent Mound. All the earliest drawings, they don't show that feature, with the possible exception of one that was done by Frederick Ward Putnam from Harvard University when he did his excavations. He's got a very weird drawing that may show that extra bend in the serpent. It's a feature that does not appear to align to any of the other astronomical elements that we see incorporated into Serpent Mound's design. The sun never goes that far north. The moon never goes that far north. The planets don't go that far north. So it can't be any of those features. What it could point to, this is just speculative, but it could point to the rising of the circumpolar constellations. It points generally to the northeast, and that would be where the constellations of things like the Big Dipper, Ursa Major would rise. That's where Draco rises. Those constellations that kind of follow along, the North Celestial Pole of how the Earth turns. If you're not familiar with that, the Earth rotates on its axis, and because the North Pole points out into space, it appears that there's one point in the sky in the northern hemisphere, one point in the sky in the southern hemisphere, around which all the stars appear to rotate because the Earth is rotating. And so that fixed point in space, is today Polaris is the star that is there. But there is the Earth has kind of a very small wobble, that
26-degree wobble.
Well, it's a wobble that, to create this kind of circle that you see in the sky from where the North Celestial Pole points to, that circle takes 26,000 plus years to complete. And so, today it's Polaris. It moves about 1 degree in that 360-degree circle every 76 years. So, you might live long enough to notice it if you remember where Polaris was in the sky when you were a little kid. You might live long enough to see it move 1 degree in the sky over your lifetime. But many ancient cultures seem to have figured out this process of what they call precession, or precession of equinoxes, how that changes over long periods of time. And what Graham was arguing, I think, for the most part, the central point of that is that Serpent Mound may be reflecting some idea of precession, but he may have looked in the wrong place. He instead of looking at where this bend in the serpent, used to be, he picked a different, location to try to confirm that information. But that's where he's kind of referencing many of these ancient cultures would have begun to learn about precession, knew about precession, and he talks about that often in a number of his books, I think.
And that's just amazing to think about, that these people, we're basically taught that they were dumb hunter-gatherer people. And
Right.
but this, the evidence shows that these guys were astronomers. They were looking at the sky, they were mapping this stuff, and it was important to them because they were, basically they were survivalists. The
Right.
seasons were important, for planting crops and things like that. So that's why it was so important for these people to map these things. But that oval at the top, I've heard people say that that's an egg, and that's what it looks like to me, and that's what I always thought. But on my recent trip, I met this guy named Thomas, and he
Tom
explained to
Johnson.
me that the Native Americans believe that this is a turtle, and he showed me some maps and stuff, and it shows like two little humps at the back, like where the legs would be, and then two more like up to the fronts, and then that little triangular small one at the top there at the cliff. And he said it used to be a turtle. He said that's what the Native Americans believe. He said because when the people from Mexico came and brought corn with it, they basically brought their god, Quetzalcoatl, and the stories to teach them how to grow the corn, and that this serpent is coming up swallowing the tortoise. And it was kind of like, something like that to the natives.
Well, there's a couple of things going on in there. Maybe I can clarify some of that information. First of all, what we see today of the oval is not what was there originally. I mentioned that that tip mound that Graham was looking at was just part of a larger mound that enveloped the oval itself. So it was like an oval within an oval, a double oval, so to speak. So that's the first thing that we have to understand when we try to start making interpretations of what we see today. Is we have to understand what it used to look like rather than what it looks like today. I try not to refer to it as an egg because I think that's a modern interpretation that largely got started with people like Squire that wrote Ancient Monuments and other people during that period of time that were doing sort of comparative religious, interpretations, looking at what people were developing in the old world, so to speak, versus old world religions were showing the serpent and the egg, in its iconography going back for thousands of years, and so they saw this and they said, oh, this is our frame of reference. We know what this looks like. We know what this is. We're going to apply that same frame of reference to it, rather than what Tom Johnson was referring to, looking at through the frame of reference of the people that actually lived here and had a different religious viewpoint, different religious outlook. Tom has carefully, brought the idea of it being a turtle. I think that is a very good possibility of what we see there, but perhaps for a different reason. Tom says it's because people from Mexico brought corn up here. That didn't happen until much later. Remember, Serpent Mound is constructed at least in 321 BC. Corn, there's no evidence, archaeology, in archaeology for finding corn this far north until much, much later, centuries later. But that's not to say that people from Mexico didn't bring their ideas up here earlier than that. They didn't necessarily have to bring corn up here. And one thing that I will say is, and I kind of hinted to this or alluded to this earlier with the way that Serpent Mound is laid out, might refer back to an earlier date. There might be some evidence that it's referring to the Mayan creation date, for example. In the very few fragmentary books that are left of the Mayan culture, there are 4 books, and all 4 of them are astronomical almanacs that talk about the rising and setting of Venus, for instance, or Jupiter or Mars or Mercury. The visible planets are all represented in those almanacs. They talk about eclipses. They talk about a whole range of astronomical phenomenon that are documented mathematically by the Mayans. That's part of the reason that these books still, sort of existed. But within those books, there are also drawings of certain things that we are still trying to understand. And one of the things that I, have seen that I think might relate to Serpent Mound specifically is you mentioned that there are features of Serpent Mound that are very faintly visible today. If I blow this map up again, let's see if I can do that. If you look at where the oval is and you look carefully on this image, you'll notice that to the upper sort of, I guess, I'm trying to give you orientation of this map. So north is at the top of the page, south is at the bottom of the page, west is on the left, east is on the right. If you look at the northwest side of the oval on this LiDAR image, you'll see that there is a feature there that appears to be extending off of the oval. Now, you were there, you visited there. Did you happen to see that feature?
I didn't notice it.
No. And there's one sort of in the southwestern side of the oval. You can see that.
I did see that. It's like a little mound or something, like the walkway or whatever went over. Tom was talking about that with me also.
Well, that's behind the head of the serpent, not by the oval. I'm talking about the ones by the
okay.
So like on the western side of the oval, there's this feature on the north side and the south side. They're actually in the trees. And the LiDAR revealed these features. Those are features that two different people who drew Serpent Mound in the early 1880s identified those features, but no one else after them ever identified them. Part of that is because when Harvard did its reconstruction of Serpent Mound, those features disappeared, as did the outer oval. They did a reconstruction of Serpent Mound during that period of time. Now, the features that Tom was talking about, where the asphalt pathway kind of goes up and down over a feature, that was a feature behind the head of the serpent, that triangular shaped feature. And there's one on the north side that is cut off from Serpent Mound by the asphalt pathway. They literally put the asphalt pathway through part of Serpent Mound and cut that feature off. All right, so those features have been interpreted by a number of different anthropologists and archaeologists, at least the features behind the head, as horns of what is known as the great horned serpent. That is a sort of mythological character or supernatural being in many, many Native American oral traditions, east of the Mississippi River. That some tribes call it the underwater panther, and others call it the great horned serpent. The great horned serpent even appears in some southwestern cultural, artistic representations that have been done prehistorically. So that this is what many archaeologists have interpreted Serpent Mound to be, is a representation of the great horned serpent, meaning that it had these horns that came off the back of the head. And those traditions talk about that the horns were actually shaped like deer antlers. So they had these antlers on the back of the head of the serpent. Okay. In one of the Mayan books, there are series of a dozen or so pages in the Dresden Codex, which is called the Serpent Pages. And they call them the Serpent Pages because there are 4 almost full-page representations of a serpent, in which the serpent has exactly the same numbers of bends that Serpent Mound here has. That it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it has a triangular head and the jaws are open, just like this Serpent Mound has. And emerging out of the mouth of these serpents, each serpent has some Mayan mythological deity coming out or emerging out of the mouth of the serpent. One of those serpents was called the deer serpent because it had antlers like a deer on the back of the head. Sound familiar? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So these kinds of features could be interpreted that way because they appear to be a kind of a larger shared body of, religious cosmology amongst all of the peoples of North America. It's not specific, perhaps, to the people that lived in, the Ohio Valley, but it might.
They were trading with each other, traveling, and everything else. So a lot of people want to put them in their
There's
bubbles.
no physical barriers to walking down to Mexico, right? I always have said that the archaeological community in the United States, they built Trump's Wall, 100 years ago. They said nobody from Mexico ever came up in the United States, which is ludicrous, right? And so the idea that there might be some shared iconography, some shared, religious cosmology between all of these people, I think is a very good bet. What we're seeing here with Serpent Mound and why Tom Johnson's, idea that this might be related to the turtle and the serpent, I think is very, worthwhile idea to consider, is that in these Mayan books, one of the things that they identify is essentially the Mayan version of the zodiac. We today in Western culture, we have essentially adopted the Greek version of the zodiac with the Greek names for all the constellations. And those have their roots in earlier traditions in the Middle East, dating back to the Sumerians and probably earlier than that, of connecting the dots the same way and creating sort of a tradition of lore around each of those figures that people imagine to be up in the sky, right? And the zodiac specifically is the area that the sun travels across the sky and goes through a certain number of constellations. We've identified that there's essentially 12, the 12 houses of the zodiac where the sun follows through that path of the sky each year. While the Mayans had their own version of that zodiac. They connected the dots differently and had different, ideas about, what mythological beings those represented. That, interestingly enough, there is one constellation of the zodiac in which the Mayans and the Western tradition have the same figure identified. And that is Scorpius, or the scorpion. The Mayans also identified the same pattern of stars as the scorpion as everybody else in the world did, which is, I think, really interesting to consider. But going back to that idea of the precession of the equinoxes, that precessional period where you had, the Earth is turning over that 26,000 year period of time, that changes the direction in which the Earth essentially is pointed for the sun to go across its path in the sky. And it changes where the sun is within the zodiac, throughout the year. If you just follow the same date, let's call it the spring equinox date, that spring equinox date will shift over long periods of time, right? And so, I don't know when your birthday is, but, whatever the month is that you've identified your zodiac sign to be, it's now shifted from what people agreed that the zodiac was, several thousand years ago. It's now shifted today. And so the sun isn't in the constellation that you're supposed to, be born in. It's actually like a month off for everybody. But going back to this idea here, the Mayan creation date refers to the beginning of their cycle of time, right? That's the period of time that ended in 2012 that everybody got so super excited about, end of the world and all that stuff, right? That cycle of time.
They just ran out of stone.
Yeah. That cycle of time represents the period of time of the sun shifting from one constellation to another constellation, right? So it's this zodiacal shift, or it's this precessional shift. The Maya creation date marks the beginning of the shift from one constellation to the other. And that shift is from the turtle to the serpent. Okay. And so that it could be what is being represented here. Tom Johnson's idea that oval with the extensions on it could be representing the turtle. And then we have the serpent, and that is marking that shift. So it could be marking that Maya creation date, as a like a physical representation of it, rather than a written representation of it that we see like in those Mayan, books of almanacs of the stars, or that they, would write that Maya creation date on their stone stela. This would be a literal physical representation of seeing that sort of shifting taking place. That's a speculative idea, but I think it's a fairly good interpretation to consider.
It's like a timestamp. I can't remember which book it was, but one of Graham's books, he talks about, he uses a modern reference. He says at the Hoover Dam, they erected a statue of like a constellational time marker of when the construction was finished. So, I mean, it's something that we're even doing today.
Yeah, I think that there are many artists that have been inspired to create, various memorials that are doing. I think there's one in the southwestern desert that I read about a couple of years ago, which some guys spent like the last, several decades building, this gigantic structure out there in the desert, to memorialize all of these astronomical alignments yet again, for some future generation to find, after our own apocalypse happens, I guess. But, and there was a lot of hyperventilating about the Georgia Guidestones, for instance, which I think had, one of those astronomical alignments, constructed within its design. It's too bad that they detonated that.
Yeah, it didn't just fall. But no. Jeff, man, I appreciate your time, and I don't want to keep you all day because, just like I told you in our previous phone conversation, I'm a big nerd, and I could sit here and talk like this for 6-8 hours, but I want to be respectful.
I could talk about Serpent Mound forever. So I just encourage people to understand that, Serpent Mound is amazing for many, many reasons. But one of the reasons and what attracted me to Serpent Mound in the first place was the incorporation of all these astronomical alignments into its design. It's the only prehistoric site in the ancient world that incorporates all of the key solar alignments, the equinoxes and sunsets of all of those key dates, as well as all of the lunar alignments, as well as planetary risings and settings, and perhaps even celestial alignments, which we didn't even talk about. That Serpent Mound might be laid out like the constellation of Draco, all in one recognizable effigy of, it's not like a circle of rocks, like Stonehenge or something. This is an actual artistic creation of something that we can recognize and see and touch and feel. And I just think that it's a sheer work of genius. The prehistoric Native Americans that built it should absolutely be credited with that that level of genius, and it's their hard-earned labor and efforts to build it, and keep maintaining it for generations so that we have some form of it today. I think it's an amazing place.
Oh, it definitely is, and especially it brought attention to me because the whole the tortoise and the snake eating it. It's if that is correct, it is depicting the coming of a new age, and it brings new meaning to me because I've heard Tom and Terry, and I've heard them just kind of say, this symbolizes rebirth. And I didn't fully understand that until you laid that out. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's the birth of a new age. If that, turns out to be correct interpretation of the snake eating the tortoise, the coming of the new age and a new birth.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little like that song, we're now in the age of Aquarius. We moved from Pisces into Aquarius, and dawn, the new age. That song from the '60s, right? It's a little like that, right? That's I think what might be being memorialized at Serpent Mound. It's I think one interpretation to consider, anyways.
Oh yeah. Well, man, thank you so much for all your time. And if you're willing, I would love to have you back and talk about some of these other mounds and sites because, as I said at the beginning of the show, you obviously have put in the time and know your stuff. But let everybody know where they can find your, websites, books, anything you want to plug if they want to, scratch that itch that you've started today.
So if people are interested in my book, Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, the expanded edition, they can find that at serpentmoundbooks.com. You can go there and, click on those books, and it'll take you to a link to order them. I do not make my books available through Amazon specifically or intentionally. I don't think that Jeff Bezos needs any more money. He's the richest guy in the world, and he doesn't need any more money. So I put it through lulu.com as the manufacturer and supplier of the book. So you can order it direct from lulu.com, or you can go through serpentmoundbooks.com and order it through there. You can also order the book Ages of the Giants, which is a book I edited by the authors Jason Jarrell and Sarah Farmer. They wrote a book about all of the giants that were excavated out of mounds throughout the Midwestern states. I edited that book and contributed about 70 photos to that book and published it because I felt that there were a lot of misinformation about the giants that has been put out there, and this was a real solid effort at trying to get at what the reality of that situation is, and looking at actual archaeologists' excavation reports in the 1900s even finding really tall people. So they can find that stuff there. If people are interested about the Friends of Serpent Mound, we have a Facebook page. You can type in, do a search on Friends of Serpent Mound. I don't know, there's like 12 or 15,000 people that are part of that group. We post all kinds of a range of information about mounds and earthworks and artifacts and whatever the latest goings on are. We hold a couple of events throughout the year. Our biggest major event is for the summer solstice, because Serpent Mound has that, alignment incorporated into its design. We have had a festival, ongoing for more than a decade there, where we have range of speakers that come in, and music and vendors and food and, crafts and all kinds of activities for the kids. And it's all free to the public. You come and, see that stuff. So you can find me in either of those two places, generally speaking. You mentioned you found me through Mikey and the Strange Road. I've done several interviews with the Strange Road podcast people about Serpent Mound. They even came out and did live video for us for a couple of the recent summer solstice events. So you can find that, if you want to listen to some of what the speakers were, talking about, you can find those there, including several of my own, lectures. So if you want to go and see some of those astronomical alignments, you can go out to YouTube and do a search on Serpent Mound time lapse or Serpent Mound equinox or Serpent Mound solstice, and you'll find, some of those videos that I've uploaded from there. So, and of course, many people find me, through the episode that I did with Graham Hancock on Ancient Apocalypse. I've been around, you can find me in a lot of different places.
You're a generous man with your time, and we are definitely appreciative of it. So, guys, hope you enjoyed that episode. Oh, man, I would really, really appreciate it. But, guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Be sure and check out all those links. I'll be sure to have those in the description for you guys. That way you can find it easier. And as always, guys, the difference between knowing and the unknown is the journey. So good journey, guys.